Programming Throwdown, episode 71, Office Spaces. Take it away, Jason.
Hey everyone. So Halloween is approaching, and one of the things we gotta do for Halloween is get our Wi-Fi set up.
Sure.
Worst segue ever. So I wanted to tell everyone about my Wi-Fi setup because I think it's pretty cool. A lot of people don't really take the time to kind of set up something, but it can really make your life a lot easier. So what I actually have the modem connected to a wireless router. The wireless router can do the 2.4 gigahertz, but it could also do the 5 gigahertz. It's like the dual band router. And then I have an extender, which is, on the other end of the house, or about halfway through the house. And so the extender allows us to extend the internet. So in other words, if we didn't have the extender, then it just happens that the cable company put our, cable modem on the far side of the house. And so we don't have internet on the other side without this extender, right? So that's pretty standard. But the part that's really cool, I installed this thing called DDWRT. And I highly recommend before you buy your wireless router that you go on the website, ddwrt.com, and make sure that your router is compatible with this. Even if you don't plan on doing it right away, it's just good to have that capability, right? And so some of the things that it does, you can actually assign domain names to MAC addresses.
So Jason, 1 second. So the idea of DDWRT is it's a replacement firmware. So instead of the firmware your router ships with, you install essentially a different operating system for the router. So a different firmware made by different people than what your router came with. And it unlocks extra capabilities. Yeah,
exactly. So basically, I think it's a version of Linux or something. I don't know the details. But imagine it's like, installing Ubuntu on your desktop instead of Windows. It's going to change basically everything. But one of the things it has, which my router didn't have the capability of, is you can say this MAC address should have this name. So for example, my desktop has the name GNOME, GNOME, and my laptop has a different name. My work laptop has a different name. And so if I want to connect to my desktop and I'm at home, I can just type, SSH GNOME. Or because, I have my own domain name, I can type SSH GNOME dot, my domain name. And it'll connect. And so even if my desktop has a different IP address, it doesn't matter. I could just connect to GNOME. And so even like the Raspberry Pi is called Pi, everything is just on a name basis. The other thing I have is, I have what's called I have a bunch of port forwarding. So I can actually SSH to gnome.my domain name, even if I'm somewhere else, like even if I'm in another country. And it'll actually go to that domain name, which will send the SSH command to my house. And then my router will send that command to GNOME. So I could do SSH GNOME from my house. I could do it from someone else's house, and it just works. And so that's DNS mask is the part of DWRT that does that. The other thing that's pretty cool, it has per MAC address bandwidth. So, have you ever had this happen where one of the computers in the house starts updating? Like someone else in your family maybe, or maybe they're watching a really high def video, or, the computer is just downloading some large update, and it kind of slows everybody else down. Like everyone else, the video starts stuttering, or if you're playing a game, it starts jittering or something like that. So I have like per MAC address bandwidth cap. So, even if it's downloading some update, and even if, Microsoft on the other end has just unlimited bandwidth, it's not going to download at more than, I don't know what I have it set to, maybe a megasecond or something. And so that's going to make sure that one computer isn't, starving everybody else. That's kind of my setup. I'm really digging it. I had an issue today, and I was able to resolve it using our tool of the show. So a little foreshadowing. But in general, having a DWRT makes life kind of way easier And I highly recommend it. And it works kind of really well with Plex and some of these other things that we've talked about in the past. Anything where you're kind of using your own network, right?
Very cool. I've been using OpenWRT and DDWRT, which I won't get into the political banter.
I actually don't know the difference. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think OpenWRT is a little harder to use, but the more open source sort of spirit one.
Oh, okay.
And they've come a long way. I don't know. I haven't used OpenWRT in a while. So when I used to use it, so DDWRT has a really nice user interface, a web GUI. And when I last used it, which probably was more than 5 years ago, OpenWRT didn't. But I've probably used some combination of the two for 7, 8 years, maybe even more, maybe 10 years.
Nice.
So for a long time. And I am by no means a networking person. So doing the things Jason said, so, doing static IPs for certain MAC addresses, naming things, doing QoS filtering so that, HTTP traffic is given preference over BitTorrent traffic, which I never have on my network.
Right, of course. Well, you have BitTorrent Sync, right? That was one of our tools of the show.
Yes. And I think also, not Steam, but some other stuff uses BitTorrent for updating stuff.
Yeah, Blizzard.
Yeah,
Blizzard games.
Yeah. And then recently, though, I gave up my last DDWRT router and went enterprise grade. And this is going to sound like total shill, but I bought Ubiquiti enterprise grade networking hardware.
How much did that cost? Was that
it turns out not as expensive as you might think hearing the words enterprise grade networking hardware. So sort of mid-range to like pretty good consumer router probably costs like $100 to $150.
Oh, okay.
And so a Ubiquiti comes sort of piecemeal. So instead of like Jason was describing like a router and a wireless access point built into one, the enterprise stuff is more split apart. And this isn't true, enterprise grade, although it can be, but this is sort of the lower end, like entry level, almost like with digital SLRs, the kind of prosumer. So it's both people who are professional enterprise, but also people who are just want really good hardware for their house. So they sort of target both.
Is it huge, or like what does it look like?
No, so it's pretty small, but it comes piecemeal. So I have a router that has no wireless capabilities, and then a single wireless access point. But the coverage on it is so much better than I was getting from my normal, just sort of like ASUS router that I had before. And part of that is because even with DWRT, you could increase the power of your router. Increasing the power of the router helps for your cell phone, for instance, to be able to hear the router, but it doesn't help the router be able to hear your phone. So
that makes sense.
Increasing power actually can help in some limited circumstances, but not in all of them. So having big antennas helps and stuff too. And some of the nicer things have that, but sort of boosting power doesn't actually advantage you as much as as I naively sort of thought. But the antennas in this Ubiquiti hardware are much better, and there's several other brands that do this sort of enterprise / prosumer stuff. But I think it ended up being, I think it's sort of like $50 for the router I got, and like $100, $110 for the access point, so like $160. So most people
that's not bad at all.
Probably don't spend that much money on their, router, but people who pay a lot of attention might.
I bought a Netgear, and I spent probably close to the same thing, and it was definitely like a high-end Netgear.
Yeah.
That's one thing we should mention, actually. Spend a lot of money on a router, because a lot of these like access points, they're totally starved for memory. Like you get this access point that tries to run Linux on, a gig of RAM or something, and it's also trying to do all this other stuff, right? So just spend the extra money and get, like a nice router that has 4 or 8 gigs of RAM. It's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. So this enterprise stuff though is super awesome in that like it's been rock solid. So since I've installed, I've never had to bounce power on my system. It's been a couple months now. And before, I got the DDWRT style stuff, I got to the point where I'd only have to reset it like once a month. Before that, I guess I have a lot of wireless devices in my house, so it was tending to be like once a week or whatever.
I'm basically in the same boat. I mean, I bought the Netgear one, and I have to cycle power on it. I actually don't even really have to, but you can kind of feel it start to degrade a little bit. But it's about every maybe 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. So far this new stuff, I switched recently, but I will say one thing it made me realize is how little I understand about networking.
So same here.
On the consumer and I've also heard good things about the new mesh routers that have been starting to roll out. Apparently they didn't used to be so good, but Jason, like he was saying, has a Wi-Fi extender. Now I think Google ships one, some other one, Ireo or something. There's a couple.
Oh yeah, right.
Where one connects to your actual modem, and then you have other devices which connect to that device, doing exactly what Jason said, only they sort of, what Jason has probably is, I don't mean this insulting, but like kind of a dumb thing. Like it just acts as a client, but it doesn't sort of cooperatively do anything with the thing that's connected to his modem. These other ones, these mesh ones, are supposed to do sort of more automatic configuration with each other to not interfere.
Like I have to manually take all my mobile devices and put them on the extender, which is in the middle of the house, and just hope that that's the best situation for them. Yeah. Whereas if you had a mesh network, they would actually seamlessly go from one to the other.
Yep. So I've heard good things about those. So apparently it's all around just getting better. But the consumer stuff hides a lot of choices for you. When you go to this other, I did a bunch of reading, kind of scraped the bare surface of the options. But apparently I thought I was, kind of hot stuff by knowing how to explore the advanced settings in my DDWRT router. It turned out no. Those weren't advanced settings. I mean, they were for it, but when I got this new hardware, the number of things in there that I didn't even understand was astronomically high.
So in the Ubiquiti one, I mean, are you in there like modifying IP tables on the command line, or does it have a decent interface?
So both. You can do everything sort of from the command line because it's meant for people who need to go install, dozens of these in one building.
Oh, I see.
And manage it remotely and all sorts of stuff. But they do actually have they have enough of a web UI, and it is intuitive enough to kind of get you through what you need to do. So I was able to get everything I needed to done. But it has all sorts of kind of nice features. Like I had put black electrical tape over the lights on my previous router.
Yeah, I have that too.
On these ones, they have an option where you just click a button and it turns all the lights off.
Oh, that's nice.
Which sounds really stupid, but it's like, oh, that's so nice.
No, it is, because I mean, ours is right next to the TV and it's just constantly blinking, right?
So, anyways, this is not a pitch for Ubiquiti stuff. I'm really enjoying it myself, but do be aware, like, I'm sure if something went really bad, it would take, that much longer for you to figure out how to fix it. But the idea is it shouldn't go bad because you're not really supposed to mess around with it.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Or at least
and they probably let you back up the config to a file or something.
It does. Mm-hmm. And then I know things like recently there was some problems, and they're really good about pushing updates because they have corporate clients who are very concerned about security and stuff. So a lot of the consumer routers, people just sort of never update their firmware. So they don't really bother pushing updates to firmware that often. But with this Ubiquiti stuff, that's actually fairly frequent in kind of updating this stuff.
Oh, that's great.
So the support is good.
Very cool. Yeah, and if you use our tool of the show, my tool of the show, which I'm not going to spoil it yet, but he'll actually tell you your Wi-Fi status, like your signal strength and everything. All right, on to news. So this interesting thing, it only affects California, but it was interesting enough I figured I would bring it up. There's a law in California now. Employers are banned from asking your prior salary. So in other words, you go to a job interview. They really like you. They say, hey, we want to make you an offer. They're not allowed to ask you what you made before. And the reason why they passed this law is it's a two-part reason. The first part is people tend to not know how to negotiate. We did talk about negotiating in the past, so check out Negotiating for Dummies is the book I recommend. But pick up any book on negotiating; it'll teach you a lot. A lot of people don't know how to negotiate. one of the big things is not to really just spill all your guts right away. If you just, let's say they were planning on paying you, $30 an hour. And so that's sort of what they have in their mind. And they think, well, we're going to lowball this person. We're going to offer them $25 an hour. So maybe that's their strategy, the potential company strategy going in. And you go and say, hey, my last job, I made $8 an hour doing the same thing. Well, they're going to use that information. They're going to say, oh, well, we're going to ask $12 an hour, and this person's going to be ecstatic. It's a 50% increase. And what you don't know as the applicant is that, they were willing to offer you, whatever I said the first time, 25 or whatever it was. So a lot of people sort of like self-injure themselves by giving away their prior salary. Particularly from the studies that they did, they found that women tend to do this much more than men. So in the theme of sort of trying to close the gender wage gap and all of that, they passed this law. So the idea is it kind of evens a playing field. It prevents everybody from making that mistake. And so it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think it's one of these things that, like, on the surface, like the way I just explained it, it sounds very obvious, right? What's not obvious is sort of how that's really going to change the dynamics, right? I don't really know sort of like what the actual implication of that is, in terms of like, I guess the company will not ask you. Some people will probably say it anyways, but a lot more people aren't going to say, which means there's going to be this sort of baseline. My guess is a lot of companies are going to start really lowballing people, which is basically going to force them to have to decline a really low offer, which is, I think, going to actually hurt women twice as much as they're being hurt already. So I actually think it's going to completely backfire, because what companies are going to do is they're going to say, hey, come for $4 an hour. And, because they're not going to have any information, so they're going to assume really low. And we'll have to see sort of who takes that and who negotiates. But I found this really interesting because, again, I'm super into game theory and all of that lately. And this fits right in my wheelhouse. So, we'll see what happens.
I feel like we should write that down. Jason claims it'll backfire. Do you have a date of when it'll backfire by?
No, well, it's one of these things we'll never really know because, so much of this,
it's also,
data is private.
Yeah, that's true. It's also very difficult because it's really tough. You want to help, but it isn't clear how to help. And
right.
That if someone is sort of consistently lowballed at every job, they sort of can fall farther and farther behind what they should be making if you sort of carry their salaries forward. But like you said, simply not revealing it doesn't prevent them from accidentally getting a lowball offer, not accidentally, but getting a lowball offer and then accepting without realizing they didn't need to accept one that low.
Exactly, right? I mean, what you want is an English auction where somebody applies to, 8 companies and then they pick the highest offer. But, that's not really practical. So, in the absence of that, there's always going to be sort of this gap, right?
This is really tough. But I mean, it's good that it's getting consideration because I feel like culturally we have a far way to go before we get over a lot of the stigmas that hurt employees.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, not to spend too much time on this, but a lot of people are afraid of, negotiating and pushing back. My 2 cents of this, number one, a company, even if they say they'll take back an offer, they'll never actually take back an offer.
I did see that happen just recently.
What?
So anecdotally, this did happen. But
wait, so is it, okay, I can see it happening if someone else, they have 2 candidates and the other person, but that's usually pretty rare. But so you're saying someone made an offer and then a company made an offer and then the person said, I want, X dollars more, and then the other company just rejected them?
No. So the story, as I understand it, was that basically I think what the candidate was trying to do that, but it just didn't end up that they were dragging their feet. And so the offer was withdrawn.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that in general, that's, that doesn't happen very often. like it doesn't happen often enough to really like consider it as part of your strategy. But yeah, I think. Oh yeah, so I was gonna say. So basically, you're negotiating with this recruiter. The recruiter wants you to take the job, and it's not the recruiter's money. Like, if you get twice as much salary, it's not like the recruiter has to pay that out. The people who want to, negotiate are actually the finance people at the company who you don't get a chance to really talk to, right? Which is on purpose, because if you develop a relationship with the finance person, that's like a huge liability for the company. So you purposely aren't exposed to those people. And so, and even the finance people, it's not their money either, right? I mean, it is sort of, I guess, an aggregate, but for a specific case, it's not really their money either. So people shouldn't be ashamed to say, look, like, I think I'm worth this, or I think I'm worth that. But you're right that it is kind of like a stigma. Most people feel like they are sort of telling the person on the other end of the line that person doesn't know what they're talking about, or something like that.
And that mostly applies to what Jason's talking about at big companies. At big companies, the people doing the hiring are very far removed from sort of the source of the money. Like they're not really in any meaningful way financially impacted by the decision. Yeah, I think all bets are probably off at small companies.
Yeah, I've never actually worked at a small company. Have you?
No. Yeah, but I can imagine that it's a different story, right? If you're talking to the owner of the company, negotiating a salary is probably a different conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you'd probably be talking straight to the stakeholder in that case. But either way, the law has good intentions, and we'll see what happens. I mean, just because I'm skeptical, it doesn't mean I don't appreciate the intent.
My article is Haskell type classes versus C++ classes, and this is I guess a sort of highbrow article, and I actually don't want to refer to it at all because of the Haskell type classes. So although I'm sure the coverage of Haskell type classes is insightful and great, and I did read the part, not being a day-to-day Haskell programmer, it was sort of, okay. And then there was a bunch of commentary. I actually picked this up from Hacker News, news.ycombinator. And there was conversation on there about sort of the right way to kind of do this in Haskell. But what I want to recommend this for is the first sort of half of the article covers sort of how classes work in C and C++. Well, how classes work in C++ and how you would implement them in C. Because once you implement them in C, you sort of directly understand kind of how they would be implemented in assembly. And then you kind of know how classes work. Now, this is something that I think, a lot of people who program in C++ never sort of stop to take time to think about this. And most people wouldn't really know what a vtable is or how it works or how it's laid out. And so I want to recommend this because I've never gone looking for that information. So maybe there are better tutorials, but this one I thought was a pretty good, clear presentation of that material. So it sort of just starts with some simple examples and walks through. And
that's cool. I didn't realize you could get the compiler to print out that information.
I didn't actually either. So Jason's saying that you can. They actually show that there's a flag I didn't know about that will get the compiler to show the vtable for a class.
Yeah, really cool.
Anyways, so check it out because this is probably gonna be horrible to try to sort of describe over.
Yeah, you have to just read it
over podcast, but. Yeah, check it out. If you write in C++, I'm a big fan of understanding what your tool set is doing. And so part of that is getting an understanding of how memory is laid out for classes in C++. And this is a great reference for that.
Very cool.
Did you ever get... I guess this is lead into the next question. Have you ever been... so you've done C++ programming before. Have you ever done an interview where you did your preferred language as C++?
No. I mean, I've had people ask me C++ specific questions, but usually I've been given the choice. And is that true? Well, I take it back. Sorry. One time I did an interview and they specifically asked me to code in C++.
Okay.
But yeah, the majority of the time I always pick like Python or Java or something for interviews.
I'm just curious. So I know I've been asked sort of detailed internal workings questions before. I never know if it's a good question or a bad question, but I will say it's considered fair game. So to ask, what is a vtable? How does it work? If you're a C++ programmer, you should sort of be prepared how to answer that. And in Java, I assume, I mean, I'm not a Java expert at that level, but I think Java has a similar thing, understanding kind of how types work and what that sort of equates to for memory management. Even though you don't have to do it yourself, understanding how it happens, I imagine is probably a fair game.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I tend to get a lot of like data structure type questions and things like that, which is why I always refer to like using Python or Java. Actually, most of the time, even Java, depending on the question. But if it's some type of, like something we have to build some data structure, it just seems like Java is a pretty easy language to do it in. But yeah, one time someone asked me to do, it was something like build an adder or something in C++. So yeah, Thomas asks, so this is, sorry, I should probably preface this. So yeah, we're actually deviating a little bit from news. I'm going to cover some questions here. So we've been getting a lot of really interesting questions. And, we were making them kind of intro topics, but, we could basically answer more questions if we kind of sprinkled them, depending on sort of the scope of the question. So Thomas actually wrote in and he asked, how do I prep for an interview? And, or actually he specifically asked, how do we prep for interviews? So I'll say, I basically, people who saw the episode that we did with Simple Programmer with John, I used to do a lot of TopCoder and HackerRank and these things. And so I just go back there. So I go to TopCoder, I solve a bunch of practice problems, and that's pretty much it. Now, like there's some times where I get asked questions that are kind of very machine learning specific. And so I might just brush up on a couple of things there. But yeah, that's really all I do is I just go on TopCoder and solve problems. And the nice thing about TopCoder, and I think HackerRank as well, is they give you the answer, not just the code, but they give you intuitively like how's the way to solve this problem, like a little dossier on each problem. And so, if you're just starting out or you encounter some really tough problem, you don't really understand, how can this be solved or how can it be solved quickly or something like that. You could always cheat, look at the answer and maybe learn some new data structure or some algorithm you didn't know or some way to reduce the problem or something like that. But yeah, that's what I do. What about you, Patrick?
Cry? No.
That's how you prepare?
Psych myself. I stand in the mirror and tell myself.
If you had one shot, one opportunity.
No, okay. So sort of what Jason said, I think
spaghetti.
It's day to day, which, okay, I want to avoid getting into discussion about whether or not technical interviews where you have to write code make sense. But
that's true too.
Saying that this is what we deal with in the industry currently, and that many companies you should be prepared to answer coding questions, then know that it is different than what you do day to day. They know that. You should know that if you look it up or pay attention. And so practicing what Jason's saying, those style of questions that are made for programming contests are, okay, well, I'm not going to compete in programming contests, except that they're built for you to solve in a constrained time period and exercise some interesting sort of puzzle solving, reasoning, aspects, statistics in a very controlled manner where someone can understand your process. And that's why they make a really good practice, is because when you sit down to solve it, it isn't, build a distributed data store using Raft consensus for data contention resolution. No one's going to write that in like an hour.
Right.
I mean, if you do, well, like you probably would have a job.
Yeah.
And so you can't, you can ask about that kind of stuff, but you can't really have a person write the code for that. It's too complicated. And so the programming contests or interview questions are great for getting your mind thinking about string manipulation, about math operations, about, arbitrary precision, numbers, these kinds of things that you may not use day to day. and just, you know, a refresher for data structures and algorithms. But I also think that a lot of times it is good to practice the soft questions as well. Like, why do you want this job? Why are you leaving your current job? And research your company that you're applying for. You know, if someone asks you, well, why do you want to come work at Jason's amazing company? Then, you know, you say, well, Jason's an amazing guy. And you know, whatever prepare for that because being caught flat-footed, even if they sort of like, okay, whatever, not a big deal. He didn't answer that question or she didn't answer that question. Great. It throws you for a spin. And if you're sort of out of sorts, it's that much harder to bounce back. So prepare for the soft questions too, and spend some amount of time thinking about how you want to present yourself. So, you know, as much as I think, at least here in California and Silicon Valley, like there isn't an expectation to wear a suit, you still want to look nice, whatever you're going to wear. Even if you wear jeans and a t-shirt, that, like, I interview people that are like that all the time. That's fine. I have no issue with that. But, you know, it helps that much. If you feel that you're dressed well, I think it comes across. Like, as silly as that sounds, I think
it's totally
you hold
true.
yourself better.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Not everybody. No, I'm sure there's someone will say, oh, you know, I go in a bathrobe and I feel like I crush it every time. You know, you're probably right. Sure, that's true. But I think for a lot of people, myself, I've noticed that if I take the time to prepare sort of what I'm going to wear, you know, if I, you know, make sure that I look presentable, then I sort of feel like I've done my due diligence. And I think that comes across. But
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think that, you know, the company wants the company you're applying at, sort of, they want you to represent them. And so you got to think like, you know, how the way you dress and the way you speak and your soft skills and all that is incredibly, incredibly important.
And I think, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I think preparing for the interview happens over years. Like,
yeah, it's true.
You sort of, it's not even 80-20, sort of like the 99% of what will get you a job or not sort of takes a long time period, months, a year, years of sort of practicing, being involved in this kind of thing. You're not going to hack your way to, you know, 1 week of practice and you're going to ace the interview. If you're really strategic and train yourself, you know, probably in a couple weeks, a month, couple months, you can probably do pretty well. Get yourself, you know, close the gap. But the bulk of it is stuff you really have to be ready for over longer periods of time. And so all the things we're discussing is to sort of take you the final distance, is to differentiate you from the other people, and to help just, you know, assure that you're that much more ready.
Yeah, makes sense.
So back to a news article. I guess we should have changed the order of these. This is an article I read a little while ago. Star Stacker Astrophotography with C++11. So although this is yet another C++ based article, just like the Haskell one, this is not much about C++ at all. Well, the Haskell one was about C++, but not about Haskell. This right. One's about astrophotography and not so much about C++. Where astrophotography is just taking pictures of stars. And I don't even remember if there was any C++ in this example.
It doesn't look like it.
I think maybe the person was not using OpenCV was the sort of trick here. They were trying to not use OpenCV to do things where if you take a picture of the night sky, your camera is really sensitive, but if you take many pictures of the night sky, you can sort of get rid of a lot of the noise that is inherent in taking a picture at night with low brightness. And although that sounds simple, that is really all astrophotography is sort of related, either gathering more light or sort of allowing you to what's called like integrate over longer periods of time, like get more samples. But the problem is, it turns out the Earth is spinning. Shocker. It's also not flat. So the Earth is a spherical-ish object, and anyway, I'm not going to get into that. And we're spinning.
Yeah, I don't know where the flat earthers have come from. It seems like that's like another thing again.
I want to believe it's just like a shtick, like a meme.
Like a joke, yeah,
probably. Anyways, but the Earth is spinning, and so if you hold the camera on a tripod pointed in a direction for very long, past sort of I think like 10 or 15 seconds, the distance the star will move will show up across a couple pixels, and you'll get what's called blur. So the star will be blurred not in a sort of Gaussian way, but in a line along the direction. And so if you leave a camera open for like half an hour, you'll start to get star trails, like these little concentric circles of the stars moving. Well, I guess the stars are fixed and the Earth is spinning. As you try to take longer and longer samples of the night sky, you need to sort of track where the stars are so that you can align all the pictures on top of each other. And that's what this goes over. And I knew a lot of this stuff, but I thought this article did a really good job of sort of a clear explanation from, I guess, kind of first principles. And what they end up with, there's already software that does this, so you don't need to do this on your own. And there's, more advanced techniques than what's presented here, but I thought this was a really good presentation of like, if you wanted to approach this really complicated subject on your own without, just using OpenCV for a lot of this stuff, here's the principles of it.
Yeah, very cool. So do they just register the images on top of each other, or do they literally calculate, the Earth's rotation and all of that?
So I don't actually know of anyone. They might calculate the Earth's rotation. In this one, they more do like figuring out constellations of stars and figuring out how the constellations move between frames.
Got it.
But I don't think they try to sort of predict where the next one will be.
Okay, makes sense.
But you should write that, Jason.
All right. That's what I'll do. All the extra time we have.
I guess you probably don't start off with a very fine measurement of where you're pointing. So it probably makes it pretty hard.
Yeah.
So you'd have to also sort of figure out the field of view and where you're pointing, and you'd have to build a model of that up.
You have to do basically slam in space. Space slam.
Space Jam?
Space Jam. Space Slam with Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny.
For reasons.
That's right. So now, book of the show. So I read a couple of kind of interesting books. I wouldn't really recommend them.
Oh dear.
So I'm not really going to. I'm actually going to recommend a classic that I've read several times, which I love, called the name is 1984. I'm sure everyone's heard of it. It's by George Orwell. He also wrote Watership Down, I believe, is George Orwell. But he's written a bunch of books about society, and 1984 is I would say almost certainly his most famous book. And without kind of spoiling too much, basically it just covers sort of like it's a fiction book about this sort of totalitarian regime, and it's where the term kind of Big Brother came from. And basically the idea is that in this book, the government literally just has sensors everywhere, and they're monitoring everything. And they've also sort of trained the people to, they've brainwashed, all the citizens. And I'm trying not to spoil too much here, but basically, they've brainwashed them to sort of, tell if another person is committing a crime and stuff like that. And then they have something called thought crime, where people are just thinking about committing a crime, they can go to jail. And so 1984 is the basis for, the Paranoia book series and a bunch of other, just all sorts of different, books and films and memes and commentary and stuff like that. You'll hear 1984 referenced very often. And so it's a great book. It's super fun to read. And it's my book of the show. Also, you could get it for free. It's a classic. It has no, copyright or anything like that. And so there's a link in the show notes to the actual book. You don't have to pay for it.
I don't think you meant Watership Down. I think it's Animal Farm.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, who wrote Watership Down?
I have no idea.
All right.
So my book of the show is Words of Radiance, which is part of the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson. And I recommended, this is the second book, and I recommended the first one previously, I'm quite sure, The Way of Kings. And so I recently finished the second book, and this is, I guess, on schedule for once, because the third book is coming out November 14th. So,
oh, nice.
Now, there's a problem, though, which is, so I listened to these books on audio because they're really long. But the first book was 45 and a half hours. The second book was 48 hours. And so the good news is, if by the time you listen to this, you could, in theory, make it through all of the books just in time for the third book to come out. But the bad news is that's like, or the good news, I guess, depending, is, I mean, that's like almost 100 hours of audio. I don't even know how many pages that would be. A lot of pages. But 100 hours between now and November 14th, if you want to get them all done in time for the release party for the third book in the series.
Yeah, marathon audiobook. I don't know if that's been done before.
So no, okay, I have to say at least something about the book. So I recommend a lot of Brandon Sanderson books, I guess. I don't know. It is what it is. I enjoy his writing style, and I don't think I'm the only one. But basically, this continues where the first book left off, and that means I can't say anything about it because basically anything I say about the second book is going to be a spoiler for the first book. So if you liked the first book, this one is also really good. If you didn't like the first book, you know, I never know what to do if I read the first book of a trilogy or a series and I don't like it. It's like, well, I could go on. And it's like, well, what? Because if I read the second book, I'm going to quit 2/3 of the way through. So I guess start it and plan to make it all the way through, although that's a big commitment. It'll probably, I guess, by the time it's all said and done, be close to 150 hours.
Wow.
So. Anyways, but the Words of Radiance is an endorsement if you finish the first book. And if you haven't read the first book, go read it. It's really good. It's fantasy, and I like it. And The Way of Kings, Book 1, Words of Radiance, Book 2. And the third one I think is going to be called Oathbringer, which I can't say why, but that means something, but I can't say why.
Okay. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Very cool. And so you can read all those books on Audible. And if you don't yet have an Audible account, you can actually go to our show notes. We have a link. It's audibletrial.com/programming throwdown. If you go to that URL, you can actually sign up and get a free book with your subscription by clicking on that link. And also that helps us keep the show up and running. So we also, for people who already have Audible or want to support us in another way, we have Patreon. It's getting pretty close to Christmas. So at Christmas, we take, whatever extra money we have from the show, and we spend it on T-shirts that we give to random people. So, we don't, you could totally, what's the word? You could totally snipe the Patreon by becoming a subscriber this month.
I think we're going to come up with, fair. I think we're going to have a more fair way than that.
Okay, maybe we'll do some roulette wheel sampling or something. But yeah, if you're a Patreon subscriber, as part of subscribing, we get access to the list of email addresses, which we don't share with anybody. We only use it for giving out free T-shirts. And so when it gets close to Christmas, sometime in November, early December, we'll start emailing some winners of T-shirts. So check us out. It's patreon.com/programming throwdown.
And I want to say thank you. I mean, I know a fair number of people. I looked on the Patreon the other day. We've got quite a few people now contributing. And I know also there's, every month, a number of people who do the Audible trial thing. And so it's encouraging, I guess. It's nice to see that people hopefully are benefiting from this. And, also, I looked the other day, the number of reviews we're getting on iTunes. We haven't really pushed that in a while or talked about it. I don't know if we've ever really pushed it, but...
it's been years, since we even mentioned it.
I mean, I think I want to say, and I think it's when you go to iTunes, you see only for your country, I believe is true.
I didn't know that.
I think that's true. And I think we have over 300 reviews now on iTunes.
Wow, that's amazing.
So thanks to all those people who did it. And if you haven't done it and you're not going to rate us, it's like the app thing. Do you not like us? If you don't like us, don't go rate us.
Yeah, that's right.
But if you really like it,
if you hate us, send us an email. If you like us, rate us, and then send us an email.
Actually, yeah, if you hate us, send us an email at definitelynotouremail@gmail.com.
That's right.
And we definitely will reply. We definitely will reply.
Yeah, that's right.
Eventually.
Oh, man. Cool. So, yeah, thank you so much for all the support. And for all the emails, too. A lot of the shows recently have been either people that we were connected with from listeners that we've interviewed, or show topics that have also come from listeners. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and we do try to get back to all of the emails, but I will say, as an excuse, I guess I feel bad about it. Sometimes emails come in during a really busy time, and so they don't always get responded to expediently. So apologize in advance if your emails don't get speedy responses.
Yeah, same here. I actually I found just a bunch of email that I flagged while I was on vacation about 6 months ago and never got to it.
Ooh,
so some people
yeah.
recently got an email from a reply from a 6-month-old email. So I apologize for that. But yeah, we definitely look at all of them and we try to reply to as many as possible.
Tool of the show. All right, so
All right,
we've
my
been teased
tool-
all show. I'm ready for this.
That's right. My tool of the show is Wi-Fi Info View. So this is just one I happen to, it's just the first thing I found on Google. There's probably others. But basically what it does is it just pulls up this menu with all the Wi-Fi access points you can see, what channel they're on, what your signal strength is to all of them, and what the level of noise and decibels is. It's the RSSI, which is some kind of like logarithm of the noise. And so basically, you can look at this and then kind of be strategic. So, for example, one time I had this issue where I was playing this video game and it started kind of stuttering. This is like a week or so ago. I thought that's kind of strange because, we have this like Wi-Fi setup that I'm pretty proud of, and it's just all of a sudden kind of glitching out. And so I unplugged my modem and did all that, and nothing seemed to fix it. So I went on this tool, and it looked good. What ended up happening is I ended up being connected to the extender by accident because I switched over to the extender to kind of fix something, and I never switched back. But with this tool, I was able to see, my signal quality to the extender is really low, which makes sense because I was using a computer that's on the other side of the house. But my signal quality to, the main router was still really good and everything. Also, you can have channel collisions. So if you and your next door neighbor both have a router on the same channel, you'll sort of interfere with each other. And so you can actually detect that with this tool. So with this tool, it might say, hey, your signal strength is 80%, and there's 3 other people with the same channel in your apartment complex. And so then you could just go in your router and change a channel. You can actually play with other things too. Like if you if you have a USB antenna, USB Wi-Fi antenna, you can actually see, if I put it up, like if I tape it to the wall, my signal strength goes up. If I point the antenna in the wrong direction, it goes down. And so, the tool just makes it very transparent what's going on.
And the reason, because there's a couple of things too, while we get nerdy, and we've already talked about networking a little. In 2.4 gigahertz, not all channels are created equal. So most of the channels that are listed on your router, if you bother to go in and configure it, overlap with other channels. So there's actually only, I think, like 5.
Yeah, that's right.
5 channels like that don't overlap. All the others overlap with each other. So
it'll let you pick them, but you'll have twice as many collisions.
Yeah, it's not ideal. And what happens when you collide is that I guess this is what you'll learn about if you ever take like networking, or if you've taken networking or any just RF stuff. It's like what you hear as CSMA, CA, or whatever, carrier sends multiple access, collision avoidance, which is basically the radio senses when 2 people are sending on the same frequency at the same time. You basically have extra energy, and you go, oh, 2 people are talking, and you enter into collision avoidance, sort of exponential back off, where the 2 people have to random wait a different amount of time and try again. So the more people that you have on the same channel, like for instance you and your neighbor, then the more chance that you have to enter into this exponential back off, which slows everything down. So that's why you want to avoid being on the same channel.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, not all channels are created equal. 5 gigahertz is better. It has a lot more channels. So the bandwidth, the number of channels is bigger because there's more bandwidth to play with.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing, just to mention real quick, if you are on 5 gigahertz, is try to avoid the really high channels, like 148, 149, because you'll actually start to interfere with the cell phone wavelength. So
Either that or
depends
crank
on
up the power on your router.
Yeah, that's right. No one in your neighborhood to be able to make calls, but yeah, it's different in Europe, but in the U.S., our our cell bands can interfere with that. So pick a low channel like 40 or 48 or something like that. But you could actually see all of this using Wi-Fi Info View. You could pick a channel like 148, and you'll see your signal strength will start to go down.
My tool of the show was sent in by last episode we talked about music making things, gadgets. Gadget is the name of one of them.
That's right.
I think
the
my tool of the
Korg,
show.
I think, was your tool of the show.
What was that? Korg, yeah, Gadget.
Yeah.
I think it's Korg Gadget was the name. And we talked about people send us some music. We can change our intro. And we actually had 2 people send in some music. So we'll probably start, putting some music at least as outros until we've had this same intro for a really long time. I guess I've become somewhat nostalgic for it. So we'll see about if we'll switch over the intro. But definitely we're going to have some outro tunes. And so thanks to those 2 people in advance. And one of them actually sent a tip for a tool, which I had seen before, but I've never played with. So I'm going on their recommendation. So we can blame them if it's bad. And that is Sunvox. So Sunvox is a modular sequencer that runs on like a plethora of platforms. So the list says Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Windows CE, if you have one of those old PDAs, nice. iOS, Android, and it has a super old school looking interface, but I think it looks kind of cool. And there's all sorts of demos of people making music that's way better than I could ever make. And so, check it out, Sunvox. If you like fiddling around and making awesome music and sounds, or if you're like me and you like making the worst possible sounding thing that not even a mother could love.
Or if you're like me and you have so little musical talent that you make something terrible and you think it sounds good.
I guess I'm obviously bad that I realize I can't have made anything good. So even if I made something good, because it came from me, I would just assume it wasn't.
That's what I do, yeah. I mean, it sounds like, I'm like, it sounds like a techno song I would hear on the radio, but I know that it only sounds that way to me because I have no talent. That was Michael who recommended Sunvox.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was trying to find it, but I was too slow. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah,
Thank you, Michael.
So, yeah, thanks, Michael. So, on to Office Spaces. So, this is also a request. I don't remember who off the top of my head. I'll look it up later on. But, there's someone wrote in and said, can you guys talk about sort of different, what your office space is like, your desk is like.
Awesome.
All of that. Yeah, that's right. It's on the moon.
Underground.
Yeah, in a bunker.
On the moon.
That would be awesome. Coding in a bunker. That'd be like a great hackathon, like a hacker space.
All right.
But unfortunately, we don't all have bunkers. Most of us work in basically 3, or I guess let's say 4 different environments. You either work in cubicles. That's probably the most common.
All the office space.
Yeah, exactly. So you have these like, what are they made of? Like
fabric.
It's like fabric, some particle board or something.
Or I guess also the Matrix, right? Neo was.
Yeah,
was
that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's these like walls that don't go all the way to the ceiling, and so everyone kind of has some amount of privacy. You kind of peek your head over the cubicle wall and all of that. You'll work in an office. So there's some companies where each person has their own office, and you have this sort of labyrinth of hallways connecting all the offices.
And sometimes you can have as many as 4, 5, 6 people sit in a single office as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean one person per office. But it does mean you can close the door, and so other than the people in the office, you're insulated. Yeah. There's also a bullpen where you can have up to 1,000 people if you have a big enough room. There's all in one gigantic room, and the difference between this and cubicles is you don't have the walls, so you'll be just desk to desk to desk, but in this very large environment. And typically in a bullpen environment, there'll be sort of spaces reserved which have couches and stuff like that, just so that if you want to something more comfortable, or you want to stretch your legs, or you want to talk to somebody. Kind of in a more private setting, you can do that.
But most people don't call them bullpens. Most people call this open office.
Yeah, right.
Like that's what most people, they say, oh, open office. That really just means everyone crammed in a big room together.
Yeah. People kind of misuse that. The last one is basically your house. A lot of people telecommute. But yeah, why don't you tell?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Do you really find telecommuting that common? And all of this section is going to be sort of skewed to the limited views of Jason and I, as far as like having not worked at a ton of variety of different places and mostly working in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I mean, where I work now, everyone telecommutes on Wednesdays.
Okay.
So that's kind of like not everyone, of course, but a lot of people. But yeah, in general, it's not really that common. I think there's this idea that, if you're there physically, you're able to sort of have a heightened sense of, collaboration and things like that.
So one of the things is like, this came up at work talking about open offices, and I did a little bit of reading, and one of the things I realized is, oh, interesting, I've never been at a place like this, but open office could really mean in a very true sense of open, no assigned seats. Like you bring a laptop and there's a bunch of, picnic tables or sort of school cafeteria style tables or whatever it might be. And whatever team you're sort of working with currently, you just sit next to them. And people just sort of mingle around. You get up and move if a group is noisy, whatever. You just sort of flow around and sit wherever you want. I've never been in an office like that. It sounds kind of cool. Sounds kind of crazy. But, I guess some people, this works for them, especially I guess if your teams are really dynamic and you're growing a lot, like I could imagine where this would be useful. But for most...
Yeah, the company that's famous for this, or one of them, is Valve. So Valve has an open office, and basically, they have one guy who's like a particle physics expert, in-game particle physics. And so, he just, if a team says, oh, my fireball particle, isn't looking the way I want it to look, then he'll sit with that team, and then he'll sit with some other team. And so I guess the way Valve is set up is they have all these specialists, and so it's kind of conducive to that sort of setup that they could be able to move around. And so they figured, why not just have everyone move around?
I didn't know that. But I think in most places, most people have assigned seats. Right. And you can, bring in a picture of your family or, get your desk just the way you want it. And I think that's sort of the most common by far. And for me, my experience out here in Silicon Valley has been you move a lot.
Yeah,
your team moves probably, every 6 months or more.
Yeah.
And so you're moving around. You might move within the same building. Your spaces just might get reconfigured. You might move to a different building. But yeah, you move pretty often.
Yeah, I've never quite figured out why. But
I think team sizes just grow and shrink so fast that this team needs more space. In order to give them more space, you have to move a different team.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, some kind of defragging type thing.
Yeah. And then I think...
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, the other common thing to offices is having some area where you can have team meetings or group meetings, conference rooms. Yep. They don't... they typically have whiteboards and, maybe a TV screen or a projector or somewhere for someone to show something off of a laptop. But, they typically hold between, sort of 6 to 20 people. And sometimes there's bigger ones, but that's pretty typical. And you'd have several of those kind of scattered around your workspace. So think about, The Office on TV, the TV show The Office, which no longer runs, everyone kind of, most of the group sort of sat in a big common area, all of the, I guess, salespeople, and then Michael Scott would call them into the conference room, and yeah, that's actually pretty typical.
Yep, that's pretty normal. I mean, a lot of conference rooms will have some way to write, so they might have a wall that's writable, or they'll have a bunch of blackboards or whiteboards or something like that.
And the other thing is conference rooms are typically have some way of reserving them. So the calendar system or whatever, where you sort of book a conference room for a time period, and that's where you hold your meetings.
Yep.
So
yeah, totally. So that's basically how almost every office is set up. Going to your desk, I personally have always had standing desks. So Patrick and I used to work together a long time ago, and where we worked, we had to deal with kind of a lot of robotics and machinery. And so I was always standing, like the desks were always standing there, and I just kind of got used to it. And I'm really a big fan of that, actually. I really love standing desks. So what I actually have now, and it's just because it's just now the standard thing, is a mechanical desk. So actually, like, you can hit a button and it'll change from a standing to a sitting desk. They have some really fancy ones where you can have like presets, so you can put in your height, and when you hit sitting desk, it'll actually go to a certain setting. I don't really have something that fancy. Mine just has you an up and a down, and when you hold the down button, it goes down. Eventually, it's down so low it becomes a sitting desk. But yeah, I think standing desks are great. I feel like I can focus a lot better when I'm standing. What about you? Do you do standing or sitting?
So mine actually is one of those fancy ones. So I have presets. So I have a preset sitting, preset standing.
And you switch or something?
Yeah, but I find that I fidget a lot more when I stand, I think.
Oh, okay.
So after a little period of time, I think I start to get defocused from it. But I try to stand, but I don't stand as much as I probably should. They say sitting kills you. So
I heard that.
I'm probably dying, but I spend most of my day sitting, but I try to spend some amount of it standing.
Yeah, makes sense.
But then, a lot of, how your desk ends up looking or being is whether you've chosen to have a desktop, a laptop, or both. So my current setup is I have a laptop that I take with me to meetings, but I mostly work on a desktop. And I think for me, I like having a desktop because it's even faster. And it's sort of in a persistent state, and everything, I have just tons of things running and tons of things open, and I don't have to worry about it because of a very powerful desktop. Versus on my laptop, I keep it, sort of a minimal working environment, so I can do work, but I'm not for me, I don't do a lot of work remotely, so I'm not really set up to work from my laptop. And
Gotcha.
I feel like power user is the wrong word, but when I sit at my desktop and I just do it just all the way I want it, and yeah, everything's set up, everything's running, everything's in warm memory, right? Like all the apps just stay running all the time, so I can just click on them and they're there and I just use them.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I'm a big fan of desktop, but I know a lot of people really love laptops so that they can, sort of work at their desk and then pick it up and take it home and just keep working.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I have all my development is like these massively parallel programs, and so I can't even really build them on one machine. So even the building of the program is distributed.
That's a good point.
So they give me a laptop, and everything I do is through SSH.
Yeah, I guess if you're connecting to the cloud anyways, it doesn't matter if it's from your desktop or your laptop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you can request a desktop where I work, but I mean, definitely there's people who are building an app or something like that, and they need a desktop. But for me, yeah, it's everything's on SSH, and so I plug my laptop into my monitor and keyboard when I'm at my desk, but it's just like a different interface. So the other thing too is external monitors. So kind of getting a lot of screen real estate. I'm the worst possible example of this. Like I literally just have one external monitor, and I mirror it. So I'm not even using the screen on my laptop. and I'll tell you the reason why. It's because I'm constantly kind of going to meetings and coming back from meetings. And whenever I do something like extending my screen, it doesn't really gracefully handle when I'm plugging and unplugging. Versus, when I have it mirrored, I plug in and everything stays in exactly the same position. And so then I just, work on the nice keyboard and mouse, but I have my mental model hasn't changed at all. And then when I unplug, the same thing. And so I haven't really found a workflow that is better than that for me. But everyone thinks I'm crazy because I have a screen that's showing the same thing that I'm not looking at.
I'm one straw short of the 6-monitor day trader.
Oh, so you're the opposite. All right, well, this is good.
So I have 2 big monitors, and then I have a third monitor, but the third monitor is plugged into a different computer. So I actually have 2 full desktop setups on my desktop. One machine with keyboard and mouse and monitor, and then a second one with 2 monitors keyboard and mouse. And then sometimes I have stuff running on my laptop, and so I have my laptop sitting next to me, not plugged into any of those monitors.
So, I think if I had a desktop, where I wouldn't have to unplug and have all the windows go berserk,
Yes.
then
Yeah.
I think I would have probably 2 monitors and I'd make use of them.
I've had 3 monitors before. For me, for my flow, 3 is too many. I don't really need 3.
Sense.
I have 3 on my desk now because I have a second desktop for bizarre reasons. But
Right.
the two monitors is about right, because basically I have one monitor in front of me where I sort of have my IDE, my terminal. Yes, I have both. And
Nice.
and then in my second monitor, so that one's sort of like straight ahead. So most people put it, sort of like the crack in the middle, and then the screen symmetric to either side of their head. But I actually
I
have
see.
one monitor straight ahead and one monitor to the right. And the
I
monitor
see.
on the right has like, my web browser, Stack Overflow, and then my
Future source code.
and my pull request, GitHub stuff, whatever, and then split with sort of email, the chat stuff. All of that lives on that right screen.
Makes sense.
And so if I'm doing like email and stuff, I'm sort of off facing to the right. But if I'm coding and focused, I'm like all straight ahead, absorbed.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think there was a time I had my laptop, it wasn't mirrored. And that's basically what I did. I had the main screen for like the coding, all of that, and the other screen had the chat and Gmail and all that.
Yeah, some people do the second screen where they rotate the monitor 90 degrees. So it's like tall.
Oh, yeah, and they could read
And then they can
papers
read.
and
Yeah,
stuff.
and that's kind of cool.
Makes sense,
But
yeah.
it bothers me because it looks weird.
Yeah, it looks like an L, like a goofy, obtuse L. So I have a friend who she consults startups for recruiting. So in other words, she's not a recruiter anymore, but she goes to startups and helps them get talent, like an advisor. And the number one thing she said is she told them to give all their employees the best, biggest monitors. And they say that when candidates come to interview, there's just something, it's like kind of, conscious, kind of subconscious. But when people come to interview and they see a bunch of really huge monitors, it massively affects whether they'll take the job or not.
Huh.
Like they look at it as like, oh, the company really cares about these people. They're giving them huge monitors. And I thought it was so bizarre. And even, the lady I was talking to, it's like an empirical thing. She didn't really have a, psychological answer or anything. But yeah, people are sort of really valued based on the size of the monitor. It becomes like a really important thing.
So also at most big companies, it's entirely possible to just get whatever sort of keyboard, mouse, chair setup you want. And when I've been at really big companies, they even have like a place you can go to, and they'll sort of measure you and recommend something for you, teach you the right way to sit and how that you're going to die
Yep.
because you sit too much.
Yeah,
No, they don't say that, but they do.
you get scoliosis.
And so you can sort of get whatever setup you want. And some people have really crazy stuff, like really fancy chairs, keyboards with mechanical switches like Cherry MX Blues that just go clack, 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 clack. You hear it across the room. It just gives me cramps thinking about pushing on those keys. They're so hard. But, people,
some people like it.
yeah, some people have like really old IBM style keyboards.
Yeah, right.
And some people have the Kinesis dished keyboards for reducing RSI, repetitive stress injury. Yeah, people will have really elaborate setups. So you
I
see
have
sort
a
of
vertical
everything.
mouse. That's sort of my speciality, I guess, is I have a vertical mouse that I really enjoy. For people who don't know, a vertical mouse is you don't have to bend your wrist. So in other words, like right now, like if you're not driving or something, put your hand on the table with your thumb, the way you'd hold a regular mouse. And if you look, your bones are actually crossed over. And it doesn't sound like it matters, but instead, like hold your arm the way you'd hold like a Coke or something, a bottle. And there's actually a mouse that feels like that. It'd be terrible for video games or something like that, but if you don't have to, be that precise or quick, it actually saves like a ton of stress on your arm. So, so that's sort of the only real ergo thing I have. So we can go to like office amenities.
So what are some of the coolest things you've seen in offices, either that you've worked at, visited, heard about, rumored about, the moon base?
Moon base. Well, okay. A lot of offices have some way to get food easily. So, because you think about it, like you're working, sometimes you pull crazy hours, especially if you're coding. A lot of coding jobs, a lot of software engineering jobs have kind of an ebb and flow. And so when you're really in a grind, you want to be able to get some food. You don't want to have to go 12, 14 hours. So most places will have like a convenient way for you to eat. Hopefully it's even just like ubiquitous food. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be just like a stash of granola bars or something. But most offices will like hit up a Costco or something every week or two, and there'll be kind of a place to eat. Some other kind of cool amenities. Some places will have a gym where you could go and work out, especially if you need to think about something. Sometimes it's good to like go for a run or even go for a walk around the building type thing. A lot of places will have a game room, so it could be some ping pong or Xbox or something like that, as a way to sort of decompress, right? Some other kind of more esoteric things are like nap pods. So for you who haven't seen this, it's actually, I don't even know how to describe it. Okay, so it's like a chair, but the chair is, tilted back. So you're lying down in this chair, and then there's this dome, and the dome just goes over your head, and it's not like playing. It's kind of like IMAX, like an IMAX just for you, except it's not playing any video. It's just a black dome that goes over your head, and so it kind of completely takes away the outside stimulus, and so you can just kind of in theory you can sleep. I think it's kind of weird to sleep like right there where everyone's working, but in theory you could do it. But it's really a way to just kind of rest your eyes and chill for a bit. There's also quiet rooms. These also be called prayer rooms. A lot of places have that, and I have to kind of confess, so when my son was really young, I actually didn't take my paternity leave. There was like a period of time in between when he was born and when I started my paternity leave, and it's kind of strategic because I had parents in town that were helping and stuff like that. But we had a newborn, like just born, and there's definitely a couple of times around that time where I slept in the quiet room for probably like an hour. And so
I'm gonna tell your boss.
yeah, if my boss is watching the podcast, well, he can't fire me because I don't work there anymore, but that happened. But yeah, so in general, quiet room is a good place, or if you're really just exhausted, you could take a nap before driving home or something like that. Those are the big sort of office amenities that I remember.
Some things people have at their desks, like, did you ever work somewhere where people had set on exercise balls? I think standing desks sort of replaced this, but
yeah, that's true.
I feel like this was a thing crazy. A while ago.
Yeah, like it's. I don't know if this has even been parodied, because I think it's one of these things that if people saw it, they just wouldn't even know what to think. But yeah, there's people who, and I'm not insulting these people in any way, but it's just like, it's an interesting thing to see. Like there's people who just, sit on an exercise ball literally all day.
And the idea is you're sort of wobbling a little, and your core kind of gets an exercise, so it's better than just kind of sitting around. I did sit on an exercise ball for a while. I used to have one at my desk, a chair and an exercise ball, until someone took it. I don't know where it went.
Someone took your
Well, so I showed up when I first started working, and someone had left one, and so I used it, and then one day mine disappeared. So maybe the person came back and took it.
I see.
But anyway, so I had one. It actually, I couldn't do it for long periods of time, but it's kind of nice if you're just like answering email or doing something that's not super focused, just sort of like bounce around a little. And I kind of liked it. I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
It looked goofy, but it was kind of fun.
I'll have to see if I can find one somewhere in the office. I'll try.
Yeah, try.
They have also the exercise ball chair, which I think is not the same thing.
Oh, wait, I don't know what that is.
That is where literally it's a chair. So the exercise ball is pinned. It can't move. But you're just getting the cushion of an exercise ball. But you're not really doing any of the workout.
Whoa, I see this. Whoa.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I saw
not
one the
seen
other
this
day. I was
before.
like, what is this?
This is cool. I kind of want one of these.
All right, you check it out. You
All right,
be the guinea
I'm gonna
pig.
contact my ergonomics department and tell them I need one of these.
You need a chair. That's
So
what
I don't think I've
like.
seen typically in like a communal space. Although I did one time see a person who had one at their actual desk. Is a treadmill desk where you have a standing desk and then a treadmill underneath it, and so you have to walk while you type. Now I do not know how this works. If you're doing like video conferencing or doing training videos or watching YouTube videos or Twitch, I mean, not totally working, sure. But I feel like if I'm programming, I get seasick, like moving my head as I walk and like trying to type.
I know.
Like,
Oh
I
my
don't get
gosh.
it. I mean, people do it and I don't knock them. It's great. I wish I could exercise that much. But like, I have seen this though. Desks where it's like a tall standing desk and then just basically like a treadmill underneath.
Yeah, I know a guy at work, and I'll call him Mike. His name is Mike. And so Mike, if you're listening to this is someone I used to work with, and yeah, as you said, he probably spent 3 hours a day on the treadmill.
Whoa, that's
desk, and he got a lot
impressive.
done. So this isn't knocking him at all. But yeah, like the idea of trying to walk and write code at the same time, it just boggles my mind.
So,
Some other kind of novelty things. Some companies do free massages. Some companies have like a valet service, so you don't have to find a place to park in the parking lot. You just get to work and hand over your keys. Even crazier, there's some valets that'll like refuel your car. So if you have an electric car, they'll
need one
make
of
sure all the
these.
cars are charged. Yeah, they'll just I guess like a tanker truck drives by, like a small tanker truck, and just fills all. I don't know. It's bizarre. Some other really novelty things. There's some people who take an airplane to work. I know somebody who, and like this is something you would hear about, like someone takes an airplane to go to the Alps to rescue someone or something, or goes to Yukon or something like that. But this is just, yeah, normal people who just take a small biplane to work. Or a ferry. We live in Silicon Valley, so there's I don't know if it's still running, but there was a ferry that was taking people from East Bay across the bay to South Bay to various companies.
well, in New York City, people take the ferry to work. Like that's pretty common. I think actually
yeah, that's
ferry
true.
isn't that novelty.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I think actually
Yeah, I
probably a
guess-
lot of people do that. That's okay though.
Yeah.
But here it is it's different. So,
Yeah, I mean, well, we have such a traffic nightmare here that
and we didn't even
Yeah.
cover all of the sort of things about, well, that's okay. It's not really part of Office Spaces, but all of the nice things that we as sort of working in the programming field, I feel like sometimes I take for granted and forget that we get health insurance and, well, I guess it depends on if you live in the United States or not, but, get health insurance, retirement account contributions, like paid internships. There's lots of things that, are sort of amenities, I guess, in some way that,
yeah,
They're pretty
yeah,
nice.
absolutely.
but yeah, I'm not
Um,
a super big fan. I've never been, even I have worked at places that have been considered to have really good offices, and I've never really been super impressed that like I feel like I can be so much more productive here.
Yeah,
As far
the
as like
only
at my
thing-
desk. The peripheral
The-
stuff is really nice, but I feel like it could be in the building next to me and be just as effective.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing that I think makes a difference is the food situation, and the only reason is because it helps to like build the camaraderie. Like
Oh,
basically,
that's fair.
yeah, like I've been like you want to be in a way like I would say if I was designing a place for people to be software engineers, I'd want to design it in a way where people were forced to like kind of socialize together, or not forced obviously, but like incentivized. And so the like having one place where everyone goes to eat is kind of a really good way to do that. Also the game room. So if you have one room just like stocked with like Xbox and a bunch of other games, then it kind of like the first thing that'll happen when you set that up is people will kind of show up when someone else is playing and then leave, and they'll kind of be like contention for the Xbox. But then people pretty quickly realize, oh well, we should just all play together, and then we don't have to have contention. Like someone could just jump into the game and instead of leaving, right? And so it kind of forces some like camaraderie and some socialization.
Well, that's
But
all I
yeah,
got
you're
for
right.
this time.
Yeah, that's There's been a whole bunch of crazy setups. You can go online. BusinessInsider.com is famous for talking about like, oh, check out, LinkedIn's new San Francisco office where you can, paraglide off the skyscraper, like these crazy things. But in general, I think we covered kind of the basics and sort of why they're important. So if you have a crazy office setup, send us an email. We'd love to hear it. If you like program while you're flying a supersonic jet or something, that would be amazing. Send us a picture.
Programming, flying, and taking a selfie. There are limits, Jason.
Yeah, I don't think. Don't end up in the news for crashing an airplane or something. That would be bad. But if you could pull off the selfie, do it.
Oh dear.
Oh man. So thanks a lot again for your support. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This isn't about a coding language or an interview with a coding language inventor or anything like that. It's kind of an off-the-wall thing. We were asked in an email about it, and so we thought it'd make a fun episode. Send us an email and let us know what you think, because there's a lot of topics like this, and whether you like it or not will really determine what we talk about. So,
all right, till next time.
See you later.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.